For more on the conflict, let's turn now to Saeed Khan. He focuses on Near East and Asian Studies at Wayne State University. Thanks very much for joining us, Saeed. Now, we've just heard there from New York. You know, we've been hearing these recommendations from the UN for some time now. How much does it really mean? I mean, how much power does the UN Security Council have in de-escalating the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, I think there's two factors there. On the one hand, the United Nations and the symbolic nature of its even commemorating the International Day of Solidarity for the Palestinian people, and the fact that Foreign Minister Wang Yi is traveling to New York to commemorate that at the UN Security Council, where China, of course, right now is holding the chair, speaks volumes for how the international community perceives this issue. Having said that, unfortunately, the mechanics of the UN Security Council don't allow for that kind of sentiment to really be actualized and operationalized in moving the proverbial needle. And of course, a lot of this has to do, unfortunately, with the United States, which essentially has become the de facto veto for any resolutions which are seen as leaning on Israel too far.
Let's talk about that for a minute. You know, the US initially vetoed a humanitarian pause, but it's flipped its position. Why has it taken so long for the US to support a pause in fighting?
Again, I think there are two issues here, Sally. One is the US and domestic politics. There is quite a bit of pressure on the Biden administration, but to be fair, President Biden seems to be far more leaning toward the side of Israel than at least the stated American position of being a balanced and an honest broker. At the same time, it seems as though the United States is also quite concerned that if Prime Minister Netanyahu were to have to leave any time before the end of the conflict, it might bring somebody more extreme from his cabinet, whether it's Mr. Smotrich or Mr. Ben-Gvir, into power. And that becomes much more difficult for the United States to leverage any kind of influence. Having said that, given the fact that the international community overwhelmingly has been calling for a ceasefire, and even in the United States, there is so much public sentiment which has shifted over the last 7 to 8 weeks toward a demand for a ceasefire. The administration here really could not avoid that.
And you mentioned Wang Yi. He'll be hosting a meeting at the UN on Wednesday. Could this be a chance for Beijing to expand on its position in the conflict? And how much sway does China really have in extending this truce?
China has a tremendous amount of geopolitical currency now, perhaps not in the United Nations Security Council, again, because of the way that's structured. But as we have seen, the current ceasefire occurred outside of, and in fact, despite the United Nations. Qatar has played a very pivotal and instrumental role in bringing together Hamas and the Israelis to achieve some kind of a negotiation on this, and in fact also an extension of the original ceasefire. China has demonstrated, particularly in the region, its bona fides and its trust building among so many of the regional players, including Saudi Arabia and Iran, when earlier this year it was able to do what seemed to be impossible, and that is to broker a rapprochement between Riyadh and Tehran. Certainly it would then be up to the players here, Israel and Hamas, to allow China in. I'm sure that the United States would not be very happy about that. But the question also is whether the United States can even wield the kind of influence that it once did in preventing China from coming into a region of the world that it had at one time exclusive or monopolistic control over.